You know, people have been trying to do that to me for years.
Finally worked.
If you're joining us on YouTube, you've not heard a wonderful introduction, and you won't hear it again. So we're in Luke chapter 5, verses 12 to 16 is Jesus' power over leprosy. So let's begin with verse. Yes, we'll begin with verse 12. It says that while he was in one of the cities, and Luke doesn't specify which city here, and this tells you that Luke is not going chronological here necessarily. He's picking out things that fit together, and so it doesn't matter what city he was in, because if he told you, you'd be wondering, well, why is he in this city now and he's somewhere else in the next instance? Because it doesn't matter. All right, so just remember that it doesn't matter. But he's in one of the cities. And behold, there was a man covered with leprosy. Leprosy. All right, how much do you know about lepers in the Bible? I'm going to ask you a few questions, a leprosy quiz, so to speak. What leper of Bethany entertained Jesus in his home? What was his name? The leper of Bethany that entertained Jesus in his home. Anybody remember? His name was Simon the leper. Remember that? Does that ring a bell? Simon the leper? No? I'm not making this up. It's in Mark 14. All right, what king of Judah was a leper until the day of his death? No?
The general.
King of Judah. You'll recognize his name at the first verse of Isaiah 6. Uzziah.
Oh, yeah.
We're told that Isaiah had his vision in the year that Uzziah died. Well, Uzziah died of leprosy. We won't get into the whole story. If you want to read the story, look at 2 Chronicles 26. All right, what captain of the armies of Syria was a leper? I heard it. Naaman, right? That's something we'll all learn about in Sunday school, maybe even back with flannel graph.
Yeah.
Okay, next, what prophetess became a snow white leper for a short time? What prophetess?
Miriam.
That's right, Miriam, the sister of Moses, Numbers 12. Next, who put his hand into his bosom and drawing it out found it leprous? Moses, to show him that God really was behind it and had the power to deliver the children of Israel from Egypt. Who became a leper after he lied to the prophet Elisha? He lied to the prophet Elisha. In fact, right after Naaman is healed, Naaman comes by and wants to dump off a bunch of goodies for Elisha. Elisha says, no, don't want it. But his servant says, I'll take it. He changed his mind, I'll take it. And so he was struck with leprosy. Also, if I'm thinking correctly, the same person that Elisha prayed that God would open his eyes so he could see that the armies of the Lord were around them, protecting them. His name was Gehazi, or Gehazi, or anyway, else what you want to say. Does that sound familiar, Gehazi? Yeah. Who told Moses to send lepers away from the Israelite camp? Send them away. Who told Moses to do that? It's simpler than you think. Yeah, God did. Lord did. Yeah. In Numbers 5. All right, last one. What is the greatest number of lepers Jesus healed at any one time?
10.
Yeah, 10. And how many came back to thank him? 1. Right. Okay. All right. So that's, I think, pretty much every instance of leprosy in the Bible, because there's not that many. Although it was a rather common disease. The symptoms of The symptoms of the ancient lepra, as it was called, as laid down by Galen, you might remember that name as an ancient physician, Areteus, Pontanus, Aegineta, Cardan, Veranda, Gordon, Farius, and others are as follows. This is the symptoms that they describe in their medical journals. The patient's voice is hoarse and comes rather through the nose than the mouth. The blood, full of little white shining bodies like grains of millet, which upon filtration separate themselves from it. The serum is scabious and destitute of its natural humidity, insomuch that salt applied to it does not dissolve. It is so dry that vinegar poured on it boils, and is so strongly bound together by little imperceptible threads that calcined lead thrown into it swims. The face, I think the face of the lesion, yeah, I couldn't think of the word there, resembles a coal half extinct, unctuous, shining, and bloated with frequent hard knobs, green at bottom and white at top. The hair is short, stiff, and brinded, and not to be torn off without bringing away some of the rotten flesh to which it adheres. If it grows again, either on the head or chin, it is always white. Athwart the forehead run large wrinkles or furrows from one temple to the other. The eyes red and inflamed and shine like those of a cat. The ears swollen and red, eaten with ulcers towards the bottom and encompassed with little glands. The nose sunk because of the rotting of the cartilage. The tongue dry and black, swollen, ulcerated, divided with furrows and spotted with grains of white. The skin covered with ulcers that die and revive on each other, or with white spots or scales like a fish. It is rough and insensible, and when cut, instead of blood, yields and they say sanious liquor, and I had to look that up. Sanious means a thin mixture of serum and pus with a slightly bloody tinge. It arrives in time to such a degree of insensibility that the wrist, feet, or even the large tendon may be pierced with a needle without the patient's feeling any pain. At last, the nose, fingers, toes, and even privy members fall off entire, and by a death peculiar to each of them, anticipate that of the patient. It is added that the body is so hot that a fresh apple held in the hand an hour will be dried and wrinkled as if exposed to the sun for a week. That's what the ancient physicians had to say about leprosy. Albert Barnes gives us a more modern explanation. He says it first exhibits itself on the surface of the skin. The appearance is not always the same, but it commonly resembles the spot made by the puncture of a pin or the pustules of a ringworm. The spots generally make their appearance very suddenly. Perhaps its appearance might be hastened by any sudden passion or as fear or anger. The spots commonly exhibit themselves at first on the face, about the nose and eyes, and increase in size a number of years until they become as large as a pea or bean. Barnes says there are three kinds of leprosy distinguished by the appearance of the spots: white, black, and red. These spots, though at first gradually spread until they cover the whole body. But though the appearance of the disease is at first in the skin, yet it is deeply seated in the bones and marrow and joints of the body. We have reason to suppose that in children it is concealed in the system for a number of years until they arrive at the age of puberty, and in adults for 3 or 4 years until at last it gives fearful indications on the skin of its having gained a well-rooted and permanent existence. So you can see from that description, it's not just a skin disease, it's something that's down deep inside. Talks about indescribable misery, bones and marrow are pervaded. It advances from one stage to another with slow and certain ruin. Let's skip over a little bit of here. There's a form of disease in which it commences at the extremities. The joints separate, the fingers, toes, and other members one by one fall off, and the malady thus gradually approaches the seat of life. The wretched victim is thus doomed to see himself dying piecemeal, assured that no human power can arrest for a moment the silent and steady march of this foe to the seat of life. The disease is contagious and hereditary, easily communicated from one to another, and is transmitted to the third and fourth generation. The last generation that is afflicted with it commonly exhibits the symptoms by decayed teeth, by a fetid breath, and by a diseased complexion. Unquote. So you can see there's a lot of layers, in a sense, to this disease. In reading the book a number of years ago by Dr. Brand, Fearfully and Wonderfully Made, Dr. Brand worked with lepers in a leper colony, and he described the cause of much of the deterioration of different parts of the body due to a form of neuropathy, and that the nerves die. And so he talks about a man who lost the feeling in his fingers, and in playing the guitar didn't realize that he was playing the guitar whittling off his fingers. They were disappearing little by little. He didn't know it. Or people putting their hand in a fire, something in a fire, not realizing it. And a part of that, the purpose of talking about the book is that God has made us in such a way that we respond to danger. The pain that we often complain about is there to alert us to something which is harmful to us. So that's the course of the disease. Today it's called Hansen's disease. It's estimated that 10 million people have it. It's very rare today. And the statistics I found were that there are fewer than 20,000 cases a year in the United States, which still sounds like a lot to me.
Yeah.
But I guess less than a lot of diseases. Now, the Old Testament leprosy included not only Hansen's disease, but psoriasis, lupus, ringworm, and Phabis. And it's a matter of the Old Testament law gives prescriptions for how to deal with it, because they didn't have the medical ability to distinguish between all those different forms of skin disease. And so there were prescriptions given for detecting the disease and then what to do with it. Rabbinic writings, writings of the rabbis, which were prior to the time of Jesus, after the time of Jesus, include a lot of remedies, sometimes magical, for a lot of different diseases, but they don't include one for leprosy. I'm reminded of the faith healers today that will heal a lot of diseases, but not the ones that are so obviously something that can't easily be taken care of. The predominant teaching of the rabbis was that disease itself was the result of sin. And for example, in a proverb, no death without sin and no pain without transgression. The sick is not healed till all his sins are forgiven him. Now, this, of course, is a negation of the doctrine of original sin, which places the cause of disease not upon individuals' transgressions, but on the fall of man in the Garden of Eden. So childlessness and leprosy are described as chastisements on people for their sin, and through that they can receive forgiveness of sins because of the severe chastisement given to them. There are 11 sins mentioned which bring about leprosy, they said. Among them, preeminently, those of which the tongue is the organ. So I suppose that goes back to Miriam, sister of Moses, who found that her tongue got her in trouble and brought about her leprosy because of her criticism of Moses and his marriage. The next word that's used here, or the word that's used here by Luke to describe this leprosy, is the word he was covered with leprosy. He just didn't have leprosy. He was covered. He was full of leprosy. And of course, this would be a medical term to describe the extent to which the disease had progressed in this man. He was full of sores, far advanced, as Luke the physician notes. The law, particularly in Leviticus 13, treats advanced cases as less unclean than the earlier stages. I suppose maybe because it's running its course. But Luke is describing here a very aggravated case. He's using a medical term here, indicating he's full of disease. The veins are, it's used other places for veins full of blood, ears full of roaring. Here he's full of leprosy. As you know, anyone with leprosy was to avoid being around any people, and they were required to call out, unclean, unclean. Maybe even ring a bell, I've heard at times, whenever they saw someone approaching them. And the law prescribed that 6 feet must intervene between the leper and others. And if there was wind blowing from the direction of the leper, the distance increased to a minimum of at least 100 feet. Sort of reminds me of some people's reaction to COVID.
Yeah.
6 feet, isn't that interesting?
They got it.
Still see the signs around. Maintain 6 feet. Well, some took it even further extreme, as I have seen some people in relation to COVID. Rabbi Meyer would not eat an egg purchased in a street where there was a leper. Another rabbi boasted that he always threw stones at them to keep them far off, while others hid themselves or ran away. To such extent did rabbinism carry its inhuman logic in considering the leper as a mourner, because they were to dress like they were in mourning. They even forbade them to wash their faces so that they would keep up the appearance of being in mourning over their own leprosy. Now, this avoidance of contact with other people included a ban upon entering any walled city. And this was enforced by the threatened administration of 40 stripes minus 1 if they came into a city. Alfred Edersheim questions the typical cause for such a prohibition, because we would think it's to keep it from spreading in the city. But he says something that's kind of interesting. He says that it could not have been to prevent infection, for all the laws in regard to leprosy are expressly stated not to have application in the case of heathens, proselytes before their conversion, and even of Israelites on their birth. So it sounds like, in a sense, we would say only for believers that this ban was put in place. So that makes me think there's more to it than just that it's spreading, but there's maybe a typological meaning to it. It wasn't just contact with a leprous person that caused contamination. They also believed that it was through just being in something, a surface contamination. Even entering a house would defile the house and everything in it, even to the beams of the roof. Now, lest you think that there was no mercy shown at all to lepers, they were allowed to attend synagogue services. Now, that's kind of shocking, isn't it? Not allowed to enter a city, but you could go into a small building. But they had to enter first and leave last, and go into a special compartment or a special room set aside for them that had to be at least 6 feet, with a wall that had to be at least 6 feet wide by about 3 to 4 feet high. All right, so we come to this leper, and we find that what Luke says about the location now takes on a little greater significance, because he does say that Jesus was in a city. So my question is, what was a leper doing in a city? And you'll say to me, doesn't matter. Okay.
Well, my thinking is that he was looking for Jesus.
And that's where Jesus can be found.
That's right.
But now you could say, well, maybe it wasn't a walled city. That could be.
Yeah.
Or you could say that he is putting himself in under the possibility of 39 lashes for just being there. But at this rate, at this point, what does he have to lose? Right? 39 lashes and possibility of not dying from this disease. Well, just something I thought of. I don't have an answer. Anybody, any other input? All right. I thought this was interesting. I came across in Barclay's Daily Study Bible, a Dr. A.B. McDonald, in an article on the leper colony, certain leper colony in which he was in charge, wrote this: "The leper is sick in mind as well as body. For some reason, there's an attitude to leprosy different from the attitude to any other disfiguring disease. It is associated with shame and horror and carries in some mysterious way a sense of guilt, although innocently acquired, like most contagious troubles. Well, that can be true of any of us. When we have a disease, we sometimes feel guilt over having it, maybe because of the burden placed on our families or whatever. But especially in the time of Jesus, when they were told that if you have leprosy, it's because of your sin, because you've done something to deserve it, which of course is kind of what we hear from a lot of preachers today too. Maybe not so much you getting it, but if you keep it, it's because of your sin, your lack of faith. You can't get rid of it. Shunned and despised, he continues, frequently do lepers consider taking their own lives, and some do. So the leper was hated until he became to hate himself. And so this is the kind of man, this is the reason I'm telling you all this, is I want you to get a sense of who this guy is that's coming to Jesus. He was unclean. He was despised. He was ostracized. And he hated himself, as well as other people hating him. And so, as one person has said, as the leper passed by, his clothes rent, his hair disheveled, the lower part of his face and his upper lip covered, which was required by the law. It was as one going to death who reads his own burial service, while the mournful words, unclean, unclean, which he uttered, proclaimed that his was both living and moral death. Another writer writes, there he lives, without love, without hope, without the simple joys and dignities of life, being smiled at, being greeted on the street, buying fresh fruit in the market, talking politics by the public fountain, laughing, getting to go to work, operating a business, haggling over prices with a shopkeeper, getting a wedding invitation, singing hymns in the synagogue, celebrating Passover with family, all these barred to him forever.
There were four lepers that were considered heroes in 2 Kings chapter 6, when Samaria Syrian siege of Samaria.
Mhm.
They went out and discovered that all the tents were vacant because God scared them off, and they fought among themselves and killed each other and ran off. And they were the only four that went into there and found all their victuals and all their gold and silver. And that's when the prophet Elijah said that that things would be much cheaper later on because of the Syrian siege. And some guy mocked him and said, behold, if the Lord would make windows of heaven, might this thing be? And he got trampled on by all the people that were rushing to go get all this Syrian goods and everything. But actually, it was the four lepers that stood out on faith that we really don't have nothing to lose.
Yeah, as I said, should we stay here and enjoy all this ourselves?
Yeah.
Or share it with the people and decide to share?
In life, we don't have nothing to lose but to surrender everything to Jesus.
Yeah.
We have nothing to lose. So let's step out on faith like the lepers people do and give it all to God.
And that's where we find this man, where he has nothing to lose. He's already a dead man. And next we see that when he saw Jesus, he fell on his face and implored him. Now, it says he saw Jesus. How did he know who was Jesus? All these people around in the city. How did he know Jesus?
By word of mouth, I would imagine more than anything.
Yeah, people talking about him.
Didn't have newspapers back then, and even if they did, they wouldn't have printed it.
Yeah, no picture circulating, but somehow he knew, maybe from the entourage that was there, people talking.
Halo.
The halo,
Face.
the halo on his above his head, yeah, that was it, I'm sure.
White robe.
So he fell on his face, which is a place of what?
Worship.
Of worship, at least
Humility.
obedience,
Surrender.
respect. But I think we're going to see. I think that putting things together, he is worshiping him, and he implores him, saying, "Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean. You can make me clean." Now, we've talked before about different conditional phrases in the Greek. First class condition is assuming something to be true. Second class condition is assuming it not to be true. And third class condition is it could go either way or it's hypothetical. This man is not confident that Jesus is willing, but he is confident that he is able. It's third class condition. I know it could go either way, Jesus. If you are willing, and you may be or you may not be, he's willing to concede that. You can make me clean. Vincent points out that all three evangelists say cleanse instead of heal for leprosy because of the notion of uncleanness, which is specially attached to this malady. Notice that the leper knows who Jesus is to the extent that he recognizes not only who he is to call him Jesus, but he recognizes his identity that he is Lord. He is Adonai. I don't think this is just the Sir kind of Lord that appears sometimes in Scripture, because if you put those two together, he is down on his face before him and he calls him Lord. I think he knew who Jesus was. I think he knew that he was Adonai, the Lord of glory. Now, is it because the leper knows Jesus' identity that he understands that Jesus certainly has the power to make him well, and that it only needs to be determined if he is willing? I think that's a part of it too. If you know who Jesus is, if you know who God is, you know you have no right to make any demands. That is why to me, it borders on blasphemy, what I hear many preachers and even Christians say concerning what they do in order to get God to do what they want and demand of God that he do certain things. My heart borders between breaking and anger when I hear those kind of things. This man knew who Jesus was, and because of that, he knew that it was up to Jesus as to whether he'd be healed or not up to him. What faith is demonstrated by this leper? Much more faith than the person who demands that God heal them. This leper had more correct theology than most at the time and most today, I think, too. I want us to consider the correct theology of the leper. I think it's instructive for us. First of all, the leper recognized Jesus as God. And as I said, it's true that falling on his face itself might not be an act of worship. It's also true that calling Jesus Lord might simply be a title of respect. But putting the two together and his understanding of what he says concerning the sovereignty of God and saying, if you are willing, I think all that leads me to believe that this leper understood who Jesus really was. Now, the next question that we can ask ourselves is, how is that possible? How is it possible that this leper understood so much more than the majority of people around?
Only the work of the Holy Spirit.
Exactly. Wish I had a bell, I'd ring it. Right? Good answer, as they say. It's the same way in which anyone recognizes who Jesus is and comes to believe in him. It's an act of God through the Holy Spirit. It's not because he was more learned. It's not because he had a lot of time to think as a leper, although maybe he did have a lot of time to think, but it's because God revealed it to him. It reminds me, because it's in the same way that Peter later recognizes the identity of Jesus as the Christ, the Son of the living God, in Matthew 16:16. And Jesus told Peter that flesh and blood did not reveal this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. And it's the same way we came to recognize who Jesus is. It is by revelation brought by the Holy Spirit. And may we never forget that. The second point in the correct theology of the leper is that the leper understood the omnipotence of Jesus. I don't think it was just because Jesus had performed many miracles that this man believed that Jesus could do anything, even bring healing to a leper. I think it was because of the recognition of who Jesus was that this man believed that Jesus could do anything, even bring healing to a leper. there's a big difference. There's a big difference between believing that God can do anything because you've seen miracles and believing he can do anything because he's God. And that's a step that many don't take. We need to be careful that we understand. And then thirdly, the leper understood the sovereignty of God and was submissive to it. Many people today will say that they believe that God is sovereign, except in the area of salvation, of course, but then proceed to demand that God do what they desire. This leper had come to the realization that God is in control and will do whatever is according to his sovereign plan. And that sovereign plan might not include his healing. And when we recognize that, when we understand that, then we have come to a point of maturity in our Christian life. Notice that Simon's reaction to Jesus in falling down before him calling the Lord was after the miracle of the fish. But this leper recognizes the lordship of Jesus even before Jesus does anything. All right, any comments to this point?
Bill, I think the whole key to the ignition system here is that word Lord.
Yeah.
There are tons of people who recognize Jesus as God and this and that, but is he God enough to be the Lord of your life? And this man knew where visibly he could see where he was.
Mm-hmm.
And the minute he saw Jesus, the Holy Spirit, and that's the power. You have the vision, word of my life. Heal me, please, if you wish.
If the Holy Spirit is truly performing an act of regeneration in a person, it will result in that person proclaiming Jesus to be Lord, or understanding him to be Lord. Yeah. You don't have to convince them that Jesus is Lord.
Many people say I believe in Jesus, but not enough to. I have a better way. It is what they're saying.
Mhm.
No, you don't.
That's right.
Bill,
Yeah, Dave.
I think there's an interesting aspect here that when a leper touched someone or came into a room, everything was unclean. Being whatever, the whole house, people, whatever. When Jesus touches something, it becomes clean.
Mhm. Right. Yeah. Which we'll see in the next verse here. Is that a segue?
Yeah, segue.
Unless, I don't want to cut off anybody else that has something to say, but he's provided the perfect segue here. Verse 13, and he stretched out his hand. I love how Luke describes these things. He stretched out his hand and touched him, saying, I am willing, be cleansed. Now, as we pointed out, it was forbidden to touch a leper or for a leper to touch anyone else. And as Dave pointed out, lepers were to do everything in their power to prevent anyone from even approaching them, let alone touch them. So how did Jesus do this without breaking the Mosaic law? And this was not just a pharisaical addition to the law that you're not to touch a leper. This was part of the Mosaic law. So how does Jesus not break the law in touching this leper?
He's God of the law. He gave the law. and
So he
is
can break the
above it.
law whenever he wants to.
He
Is
makes
that what you're saying?
people, not people, not for himself.
Yeah. Okay. We can, and that would be a perfectly legitimate explanation. I think there's another one, at least
He
to
said
satisfy
it
you.
Sabbath wasn't made for man, but was made for God, and he said it's better, is it, if a cow fell into a hole, would you not take him out on the Sabbath, and,
Mhm.
you know? And then there was no evidence that there was ever leprosy there afterwards, so how could you, there's no evidence.
Well, yeah, and I think that's the little bit of the perspective that I'm approaching it here. I think that as he was saying, be cleansed, at the point of touching the man, was he cleansed then or a second after? I think he was cleansed as Jesus reached out to touch him.
Yeah,
So when Jesus touched him, he no longer was leprous.
right.
Yeah.
He was already cleansed. So Jesus did not touch a leper. He touched a former leper
Right.
by the time he touched him.
And how many of those has he done? We were all formerly leopardess until he touched.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about that probably next week. It looks like at this point, we'll see. Maybe we'll get there. And maybe the reason, okay, so why did he touch him? I mean, he could have just said be cleansed. Why did he touch him? Let's assume that he was cleansed at the point, the second before he touched them, or as he touched them. So why did he even touch him?
You sure it was clean?
Yeah, yeah, I think that's it. To show that he was clean. He was no longer this unclean leper. One person has said this: I wonder, how long has it been since someone has shaken his hand, patted him on the back,
Yeah.
put an arm around his waist, rubbed his shoulders, hugged him, stroked his hair, touched his cheek, wiped a tear from his eye, or kissed him? And Jesus touches him. How many years had it been?
It's beautifully compassionate.
Yeah.
Because it's, this man hadn't had a person touch him in who knows how long.
Mhm.
Because he was covered.
Yeah,
He'd been that way for a while.
yeah.
Bill, was there something there with Luke being a doctor that was important to him?
Yeah,
Because
I think
that's
so.
What they did, they
I think you see that
touched
throughout the
people.
gospel of Luke, yeah. The bedside manner was important to Luke.
I was in I did an internship at Julie's church even before we were married. And the pastor there had broken his neck, fallen off a trampoline and broke his neck. And there's a hospital in Denver that specializes in spinal cord injuries. So they were able to take him from the ambulance to the specialized hospital. He recovered to where less than 2% of people recover from such an accident. Then he became a chaplain at that hospital. And I rounded with him. And he would go into these rooms and, these people are paralyzed. Different levels, different things. We walked into a room. He walked right up to this guy I'd never met before and put his hands on his face.
Hmm.
And the man just started crying. Just right away started crying. Because he hadn't felt anybody in so long.
Hmm.
Everybody walks in and grabs his hand.
Mhm.
He couldn't feel his hand.
Hmm.
And this guy knew from his own experience, and he just touched him and it just weeping.
Hmm.
Because he just hadn't felt anybody touch him for so long.
Yeah. Hmm.
It's just powerful.
And no one else even thought about doing it.
You would never walk up to somebody you don't know and
Yeah.
put your hands on their face.
Yeah. Hmm.
It was really, as you think of the compassion of this, it's just powerfully
Hmm.
compassionate.
Yeah, good illustration.
I was thinking, Bill, these people are very deformed too. I mean, there's obviously the holes and stuff.
Yeah.
I wonder if they were completely like clean complexion and no holes and all that,
When he's cleansed,
Yeah,
yeah,
it's amazing.
yeah, it would have to be. Yeah. Well, the next sentence says, surprisingly, right? Immediately, the leprosy left him. The next thing might be surprising. He ordered him to tell no one. So immediately the leprosy left him. There's no process. It's not, go home and, take a bath and see what happens or whatever. Immediately it left him. But then he ordered him to tell no one. No one. Not even anybody you might happen to meet along the road. Don't even tell them. Don't go to your family. Tell no one. That sounds kind of counterproductive, doesn't it? Doesn't Jesus want people to know what he's doing? Well, I think the answer to that is in the next sentence. But go show yourself to the priest and make an offering for your cleansing. Now, I don't know about you, but I normally think of a statement like this, go show yourself to the priest, meaning that he has to travel to Jerusalem. But that's not necessarily so. There were priests that lived all over the land, up in the Galilee even. So I think he could go to any priest. I don't think it was designated, as far as I remember, a particular priest or a location, because when the law was given, remember, they weren't, the center of worship wasn't Jerusalem. It was in a tabernacle. It was traveling. So it was go to a priest, probably in the province nearby, whose business it was to attend to such things. And then we're told he was to make an offering. The Mosaic offering was to be a pair of birds. This actually, never mind that, it's coming later. I don't have a slide for this. A pair of birds, one of which was killed over running water. The other, having been dipped into this mingled blood and water, was then free to fly away in its native air. And that was emblematic of the forgiven and cleansed soul. And so you can see the relationship that there is between leprosy and the concept of sin. That gift consisted of 2 birds, alive and clean, also used cedar wood, scarlet, and hyssop. And the procedure that would be a part of this, where the priest would examine the person and make these offerings, would take about a week. Now, the fact that a sacrificial ritual was given for a cleansed leper implies at least the possibility of a cure. But it is in every instance that we have recorded traced to the direct agency of God. There's no place indicated where any person with leprosy was ever cured except by a direct act of God. And the possibility of any cure through human agency was never even contemplated by the Jews. That's why the rabbis don't talk about being able to do anything. And notice that this was just as Moses commanded, as a testimony to them. Now, he's to go to a priest, singular, and Jesus says it is a testimony to them, plural. Who's the them?
All of Israel.
Could be all of Israel, but I would think that maybe he would say all of Israel if he was talking about them in that way. Who would be a more specific them?
Pharisees.
The other priests.
The priest himself.
Yeah, because if you go before one priest, he's not going to talk to the other priests. Why is it important to Jesus that the other priests hear about this? Because they knew that one of the signs of the Messiah was the curing of leprosy. And they would be the ones that could authenticate it. It's not just a rumor out there. These are priests that had actually seen the process go forth. And the messages then could go from the priests to the people. One more thing. Jesus ordered him. This is a word used of military orders. Aristotle uses it of a physician to prescribe something. You know, we've all been in a doctor's office and he orders us to do something or to take something. And that's what Jesus says, here's your prescription. Not to take anything, but don't tell anybody, but go to a priest. That's your prescription.
Don't you think in his admissions that he knew that by doing so would probably agonize him to go out even more as he did?
Yeah, the other gospels.
It tells some people in order that it makes them want to do the very opposite.
Yeah, I don't think Jesus was intending to make the man disobedient, but we are told in the other gospels that he did tell other people, as would be expected. All right, next week we're going to look at some other points to ponder concerning this, and I'll look at leprosy as an allegory for sin, and then go on to the next healing, possibly next week as well. If you're watching on YouTube, please like, follow, subscribe, tell your friends, and hopefully we'll see you next Sunday morning. Thank you.